Welcome to this video about creating proportional symbol maps inside of Tableau. So remember, a filled map, what that's going to do is that aggregates an area with a specific number. So here we see each county is assigned one number. Whereas a proportional symbol map, what it's going to do is we're going to put, typically we use circles, but we're going to put a dot or a circle on a map, kind of as a way of signifying that there was an event or something was happening in that location. Then what we do is we add a secondary dimension, and that secondary dimension we usually add onto the size of the circle. So the number of circles tells me something about the number of events, but then the size of the circle tells me about the number of whatever that secondary measure is. And so the bigger the circle, the higher the number, the more the severity, kind of whatever that secondary measure is. You could also add a third measure to it by using color. So what we could do is if we were, let's say we want to track maybe COVID outbreaks. So I would have a map of my county. I would have an individual location, maybe a latitude and a longitude for each individual, maybe it's case that we have. And so we would plot those different cases. Maybe it's the zip code or whatever. So we'd have a different circle there for each one of those. And then the size of the circle would tell me about maybe the number of cases that happened in that location. So the larger the circle, that would mean there was more cases. And then we could put that third dimension on there, which would be we could do that almost as like the mortality rate. And so we could have the color of the circle then also relate to maybe how deadly that specific outbreak was in that location. For ours today, we're just going to be focusing on we're going to put city will be our kind of individual location points. And then we're going to put our patient count on those cities. So the larger the circle, that means the more patients we had in that specific city. The smaller the circle, the less patients we had. And then we'll do some formatting things and talk through how to make it look just a little bit better. So I'm going to go ahead and rename this sheet here, proportional symbol map. And I'm going to switch over to our patient era example de-identified. This is the one that has multiple different data sources on it. So first thing I'm going to do is let's go ahead and double click city. I'm going to bring out a bunch of our different cities here. Click on our 15 unknown, edit locations. So some of these are just cities here that maybe they're just not recognized. We could go in and I guess I can show you that. You can go into each one of these, and so Falcon is a place here in Colorado. So the closest place to it is probably this Falcon Air Force Base. So we could probably go ahead and make that one. So if you know the name of it, or maybe you see that it's just misspelled, you can go in and update that. You can also enter in a latitude and a longitude. So if you wanted to go to some web browser, find your latitude and longitudes of these specific places, you can kind of hard code those in. I don't really feel like updating any of these, so I'm just going to cancel. Click on that, and let's just go ahead and filter all those out. All right, so now that I have an individual point here, so these are all of the cities. So this could be like that first measure that we talked about. This would just be the number of cities or locations that we have in the state. Let's grab that patient count, and we're going to drop that on the size button. So now what that's going to show us is that the larger the circle, the more patients there were, and then for some of these smaller circles, that's just letting us know that we had less patients there. I'm going to click on the size button, and I'm going to increase the size of these, maybe not that much. Then what I'm going to do is click on the color button. I'm just going to update the color. It's kind of arbitrary at this point, and I think we've talked about this idea of typically when you're using color, we want it to be something that makes sense. So in this case, maybe black makes sense because everything on my map is colorful already. So by doing black, I'm not really doing anything with the color, so to speak. What I'm going to do is update my opacity on a 70, maybe a little bit less than that. By doing the opacity a little bit lower, that way I can see here in the Denver area kind of some more of my overlap circles. I also will typically add a border to my circles. It can just add a little bit more pop to it, especially if you are using a color. Just having that dark border really kind of highlights those specific circles. And what we could do here is we could grab our vaccine groups. I'm just going to right click. Let's go ahead and show that as a filter. And let's do our single value drop down. And let's just look at our HEPA. I don't really love the size legends that Tableau provides, so I'm actually just going to get rid of that. I think a lot of times legends can be, in this case, I don't necessarily need people to know that like the individual just point means it's 1, and then like that one means it's 12. I think it's fairly intuitive that the smaller the circle, the smaller the numbers, the larger, the bigger they are. One thing we could do here is if we come up here to our map, I can click on here. I'm going to search for Fort Collins. So here's the Fort Collins point. So what I'm going to do is right click on that circle for Fort Collins. Let's come down to here to annotate. I'm going to click annotate mark. And instead of it saying city, then telling me what the city is, I'm just going to have it say Fort Collins. And I'm fine with it saying the number of patients. So at this point, I'm going to go and click OK. And so what that's going to do is that's going to label kind of that Fort Collins point. So then if I click this thumbtack to zoom in on the map, now I've got a annotation up here that's pointing to Fort Collins. I'd probably try to reposition it so that I can see where that is going. You can also right click on this, click format. I might make my line just a little bit darker just so I can see that. You can update the box. You can have no box. You can shade it or not shade it, give it borders, rounded corners. It's really all up to you. Annotations can be very useful with maps like this, or really with any visualization if there's a specific location or mark that you're really wanting to highlight for your end users. Annotations can be a good way of doing that. At this point, probably what I would do is update my title, make sure I include that vaccine group inside, embedded in my title, so that way as my end user updates that, my title updates with them. And yeah, that's probably all I would do on this one. You can click through your different vaccine groups. Notice as I change that vaccine group, my annotation numbers also adjust accordingly. So at this point, this is what we would call a proportional symbol map. Remember, at this point, we now have talked about density maps, and we have created our filled maps. So those are really like the 3 main types of maps that you can make inside of Tableau. I think it really just depends on what you're trying to show. The important thing with proportional symbol maps is that the size of the symbol is representative of another measure. With filled maps, you're aggregating areas to a specific number. So if you think about like political maps, or even with this filled map here, the entire county is assigned 1 positivity rate. So even though there might be different facilities or cities within that county that have varying positivity rates, the whole county is rolled up to 1 single number. And then density maps are used to show when there's a high density or collection of points in specific areas versus when they're kind of fairly sparse and there's less points within a given area. Thank you for watching these videos. I hope they have been helpful, especially since we didn't get to cover them in the training. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. As always, you can also Google or go to Tableau's resources, blog posts, and things like that to try to find answers to your questions as well. Thanks.